The Cleveland Torso Murders, also known as the case of the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, is one of the most terrifying and grisly chapters in American true crime history. It takes us back to the 1930s, to a dark period in Cleveland's history, where an unknown serial killer struck fear into the heart of the city by committing a string of brutal, unsolved murders. Our story begins in 1934. During the Great Depression, Cleveland, like most of America, was struggling. The area, known as Kingsbury Run, a low-income neighborhood, was an unforgiving place where the homeless and the desperate gathered. Kingsbury Run was infamous, lined with shanty towns and encampments, where transient workers and society's forgotten outcasts tried to survive. The first body associated with this case was found in September 1934, when a young man came across the lower half of a woman's torso, neatly severed, washed up on the shores of Lake Erie. The body was mutilated in such a way that police suspected this was more than just an accident or a simple crime of passion. It was disturbing, horrific, and terrifyingly precise. But because no one knew who this woman was, her murder was filed away as an isolated incident. Authorities had no idea that this was only the beginning of a long and terrifying series of murders that would soon rock the city. A year and a half later, in September 1935, two more bodies appeared, both men this time. One was found in a way that echoed the previous discovery, a torso with limbs severed cleanly, skillfully. The other body was found just a few days later, badly decomposed and hidden in a shallow gully nearby. Both men's heads were missing, a grim detail that would become one of the killer's signatures. And with these discoveries, the Cleveland police finally realized they were dealing with something far darker and more organized than they'd ever imagined. A serial killer was on the loose, and he was escalating. The killer's reign of terror continued, and each discovery seemed more grotesque than the last. In early 1936, two more bodies were found, one of them so brutally mutilated that police could only identify the victim as John Doe. Some bodies were found without limbs, others without heads, and several were so decayed that identification was impossible. There was one thing that tied each crime together. Whoever the Mad Butcher was, he knew his way around the human body. Some authorities believed he must have had medical training or experience as a butcher. His cuts were clean, and he had a deep understanding of anatomy. The bodies kept appearing, each discovery more disturbing than the last. In July 1936, the torso of a woman was found wrapped in a burlap sack and left in the middle of Kingsbury Run, almost as if the killer was taunting the police. Months later, two more torsos were discovered in the area, again headless without limbs. In total, at least 12 victims were officially connected to the Mad Butcher, though some reports suggest that the real number could have been as high as 20 or even 30. Yet, despite the killer's apparent confidence, he remained elusive, leaving the police and Ness grasping at straws. One of the most chilling aspects of the Cleveland Torso murders is that to this day, the killer's identity remains unknown. Police had several suspects over the years, and one man, a doctor named Francis Sweeney, caught the attention of Eliot Ness. Sweeney was a World War I veteran who had served as a medical doctor and knew his way around a scalpel. There were disturbing rumors about Sweeney's life, including substance abuse and violent behavior, but it was his medical background and his knowledge of anatomy that made him a prime suspect. Ness even went as far as to personally interrogate Sweeney, putting him through intense questioning, which reportedly included a lie detector test, something quite rare for that time. What's fascinating is that although Sweeney failed the test, Ness couldn't gather enough evidence to charge him. Sweeney was reportedly connected to powerful people, and his family had significant influence. Despite his suspicions, Ness had to let him go. Some say this failure haunted Ness for the rest of his life, as the murders continued to cast a dark shadow over Cleveland. Elliot Ness tried one last desperate attempt to stop the Mad Butcher. In 1938, he led a raid on the shanty towns of Kingsbury Run, burning them to the ground in an effort to drive out anyone who might be hiding there. It was a controversial move, one that displaced hundreds of homeless people and cost Ness significant public support. But whether it was because of the raid or for other reasons, the murders suddenly stopped after that. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run was never heard from again. To this day, the Cleveland Torso murders remain one of America's oldest unsolved cases. There are theories, of course. Some believe that the killer may have been someone of high status, which is why he was never caught. Others think he might have left Cleveland or simply stopped killing. Still, there are those who think the killer took his secrets to the grave, perhaps even buried among the very bodies he left in Kingsbury Run. As for Ness, the case would follow him for the rest of his life. He was remembered as a hero for bringing down Al Capone, but in Cleveland, his legacy was forever shadowed by the Mad Butcher's reign of terror.